good afternoon, and thank you again for your kind presentation, Marike, and thank you for having me here. This is my first time at Europeana. I'm really excited about it. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm grateful for this opportunity and for meeting you all, although virtually. As you have heard, I'm not a museum professional. I am, and I guess I have a different background from most of you. So bear with me because I may probably look like I'm an outsider here. But actually, I'm a postdoc researcher in translation studies, and my current research project draws on different disciplines and touches upon different issues, as you can see here. And today I'm going to share some reflections with you. Some of them, I think, are very much related to what Tina has just shared with us. So these are the main points I'll try to cover. First, an introduction to museum audio description or museum ID, and museum accessibility issues in relation to disabilities. Then I will suggest a wider use of museum audio description and explain its potential for all. And I will try to propose a shift in perspective. And I will later examine with you different approaches to accessibility by comparing museum audio descriptions with other resources. And this hopefully will allow us to recognize some of the benefits of using inclusive museum audio descriptions. And then finally, I will propose a possible integration maybe of this resource into Europeana. But before starting, I would love to hear from you. So I already have a question for you. Have you ever heard of museum audio descriptions? Does anybody know what they are? I think we've heard a little bit from Tina already, but I have prepared a quick poll and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So you can either go to menti.com and use this code, or you can use the link that Marike will kindly share with you in the chat. So most of you apparently say that you may know what it is, but you're not sure. Some of you have, some of you know what it is or have used it. Some of you normally use a different term to refer to it. Tina also used audio introductions earlier. But yeah, I can see most of you are not sure about it. Before actually telling you what it is, let's hear an example. We will listen to two shorts, extract actually, from two different audio recordings that are related to the same museum object. In this case, it's from the British Museum in London. So I'm going to play them for you.
171. Sculpture titled Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is a contemporary sculpture created especially for the British Museum in 2004. It's made entirely out of decommissioned firearms. The tree stands 3.5 meters tall and is displayed on a wooden platform without a glass case enclosing it. Its trunk is a filigree of tarnished brown rusted metal, rising from 4 thick roots at the base and sprouting overhead into a canopy of branches. 2/3 of the way up, a small monkey springs up the trunk, its tail curved, its eyes trained on a bird's nest in a branch above its head. A bird, wings spread, feeds her chicks in the nest that is partly hidden by leaves. On the opposite side of the tree, a butterfly hangs from a branch. Around the base of the trunk are more creatures, birds with thick feathers, a lizard, a tortoise, and a giant butterfly.
Okay, I'll stop here. And here comes the second one.
The metal sculpture, Tree of Life, is filled with energy, a large tree surrounded and inhabited by animals. Take a closer look. Can you guess where the metal came from? 4 Mozambican artists created this sculpture in 2004 from bits and pieces of modern firearms. They were working with Transforming Arms into Tools, a project to dispose of 7 million guns left in Mozambique after the country's civil war by recycling them into art. In 1977, Mozambique had just fought for and won its independence from colonial rule when apartheid South Africa, with backing from Western interests, poured weapons into the country to try to destabilize it.
Okay, sorry for stopping it here. We listened to a minute for each at least. And now I have a different question for you and a different poll, if you are happy with participating in another one. It's another very short poll for you. In your opinion, which one of the two recordings is an audio description? And this is probably based on your assumptions of how different, of your perceptions of how different they are. The first recording we've been listening to is the audio description, and the second one, then what is the second one? And the second is probably a more common audio guide that we are all familiar with. And yes, so you're right. The first one was the audio description. But why? What's the difference between them? And so actually, what is a museum audio description then? So within the media accessibility framework, museum audio description, or museum AD, is a descriptive guide, very much similar to an audio guide, for example, of an artwork or an artifact that is primarily intended for and addressed to blind and partially sighted individuals. So it's been traditionally conceived as an access tool, that is a verbal description of visual input. It's also a form of translation. But Joel Snyder, an AD researcher and professional describer, reminds us that a visual image may need to be made accessible not only to people with visual impairments, but actually also to those among us who can see but cannot observe, or who just may want more guidance, which is the point of my presentation. Sorry. So as a practice, museum AD may be provided either live or pre-recorded and then embedded into a specific device or a mobile app to be used on-site or online, for example, on a museum website. And it's an increasingly common practice in museums in the UK and in the US, and is more slowly gaining momentum in other countries in Europe. AD provision, as we've just seen with Tina, may complement or be complemented by a range of tools to improve access, such as leaflets in large print, braille, replicas, tactile reproductions. But actually, one of the most, probably most important advantages of museum AD is that it doesn't need to be used on site, because it doesn't necessarily involve tactile exploration. So it may be an additional online resource to expand access to the collections. And here I'm positioning museum audio description within the wider, what I like to call museum communication framework or interpretation framework, including different resources related to cultural heritage. There are only a few here, which may be provided online. Others may be augmented reality experiences, video games, apps, and so on. And I quoted Whitehead here when he says that museum interpretation can unlock understandings and stimulate social interactions by producing a cultural map that can be accessed and understood by the many rather than by the few. And I think this may also be enhanced by audio description as an instance of museum interpretation. When provided online, museum AD tends to be included on museum website within the access program or accessibility provision. Here is an example from the National Gallery of Ireland. And sometimes it's actually very hard to find, or it may be available only on site. It's true that access resources are often not very accessible themselves, not easy to find. It seems like a paradox. But when talking about disabilities, the major focus still tends to be on physical disabilities, with a concern about physical barriers. But here I would like to draw attention to other types of disabilities, such as visual impairment, and also remind you that people may have different degrees of disabilities. And in fact, part of the AD audiences can see, have some residual vision, or have still memory, visual memory. So it's not just the blind or the non-sighted or the visually impaired. It's not just that simple, I think. And as a matter of fact, in the past few years, the focus of attention has slowly shifted from sensorial disabilities to distinct abilities. So from a disability-based to a capability-based model. And actually the concept itself of disability, lack of ability, has been reframed and redefined as the result of a disabling society. And new awareness has recognized that the conception of access strategies and access tools as forms for compensating for each type of sensory loss in isolation only reinforces exclusion and marginalization of minority audiences. So although traditionally conceived as an access tool, the AD of cultural artifacts and artworks can be explored from a new perspective that acknowledges its potential for non-sighted and sighted alike. So stigmatizing AD as a special tool exclusively intended for a specific group without allowing other people, also sighted people, to use it may be equally discriminating. Of course, a one-size-fits-all solution may not exist, but the objective is to accommodate the needs of as many potential users as possible, right from the design stage, rather than as an afterthought. So research has already partially highlighted the potential, so the broader potential scope and benefit that Museum AD may have beyond its application as an access tool. And in fact, AD may also cater other groups along with the visually impaired, such as people learning foreign languages, educators, the elderly, migrants, visitors with special cognitive needs, as well as children with autism. But why the title of this presentation? Why different ways of seeing? The fact is that museums still tend to be framed within a visual-centric, ocular-centric model, but research has sought to challenge the assumption that sighted people don't need further visual guidance for decoding and appreciating cultural heritage. But given the current predominance of vision over the other senses in museums, the passive act of seeing needs to be distinguished from the active one, the more active one of looking. So Museum AD is here proposed as a way, as an enriching opportunity for guided looking that can encourage any individual to linger on an artwork or an artifact and establish a deeper and also memorable or a long-lasting connection with it. Here is a short example. It's actually an extract from a Museum AD available on the Tate website. This provides a rich, detailed description of the specific flowers depicted and their colors, which are details, they're beautiful details, I think, that may go unnoticed to any one of us. And this may be particularly interesting, for example, for someone learning a foreign language who may benefit from a clear association between a concept or a specific word, such as carnation, and a visual image. And actually, sighted people increasingly tend to expect descriptions of what they can see, because these can confirm their perceptions and they can help them focus attention. So what I'm saying is that standard audio tours can also be integrated with audio descriptions, offering an all-in-one resource. But just to give you a little more context before moving on, media accessibility, I mentioned media accessibility. It is a recently born discipline focusing on practices making cultural venues accessible to people with sensory impairments. And it's now coming forward as a driving force for social change, because it's paying growing attention towards the involvement of users in the investigation and in the design of accessibility resources. And this, of course, implies a more user-centered perspective, in line also with the principle, nothing about us without us. So scholars have started to apply to explore AD within a universal design provision that can actually enhance the museum experience for both non-sighted and sighted visitors. Okay, we all know this definition by now, probably by heart, but why is it relevant to what I'm saying? Museums are called to be not just accessible, but also inclusive. They're expected to foster diversity and to communicate ethically. And this is part of the definition, of ICOM's definition, at least, of museums. So it probably reflects, to some extent, our own common expectations of the museum mission and roles in today's society. And most importantly, contemporary museums are progressively called to take up their social responsibility to ensure equal access and support a democratic society. This responsibility also translates into a responsibility, that is the ability to actually respond to current issues and do something about them by addressing inequalities and through social agency and acting as open platforms for dialogue. So my aim here is to propose a change of perspective from an accessibility-oriented approach to one centered on social inclusion. These are related issues, of course, but the former implies a focus on disabilities and results in providing a separate gateway and special access services dedicated to specific groups, while the latter shows a shift to distinct abilities, different needs, different preferences, but also recognizes a new universality that embraces diversity and particularity, while at the same time fostering social inclusion. So this seems to be a more holistic, integrated approach and perspective that considers Museum AD as an enriching opportunity for all. And by extending the scope and the beneficiaries of Museum ID, non-sighted and sighted individuals may actually share a common museum experience, which can contribute to inclusion rather than integration by way of compensating for sensorial impairments. So let's just see a few examples of different approaches involving Museum AD. Here is the, let's say, particularist approach. There is a museum ID and then another interpretative text, the general audio guide. They're both available online on the Pinacoteca di Brera's website. And this is a very famous Italian painting. Both texts, if you look at them, they both use a rather subjective approach by saying that the two characters are passionately embracing. But actually, if you look at the two texts closer, they provide a different interpretation of the shadow, this one, the shadow on the left-hand side of the painting. And the audio guide describes the shadow as a threat, while the visual AD only mentions a human figure without any further connotation. Now, I can guess why, but why this further interpretation for sighted audiences, and why not for non-sighted audiences then? Why not suggesting possible interpretations without a patronizing style for all, maybe? This is, of course, a provocation. If we keep in mind the same painting, Sometimes the audio guide provides more contextual information that is missing in the AD. Here on the left-hand side, we can see other extracts from the same audio description and the same audio guide, where the painting by Ayeth, Kiss, is described by remarking its immediate success and the numerous versions and prints that multiplied when the artist was still alive. And this is also acknowledged on the right-hand side of the screen by the information provided on the Europeana platform about this painting, as you can see here. But actually, only the audio guide refers to another painting by a different artist who was contemporary to Ayeth, exhibited in the same museum room next to this one, showing a reproduction of Ayeth's painting within it. And it's Gerolamo Induno's Doleful Premonition. And you can see it here. You can see on the left again the Kiss by Ayeth, and then you can see an augmented detail here below this one, which is this detail here. So the audio guide provides this intertextual, we could say intertextual reference that confirms the success of the painting by Ayeth. But why is this information deemed to be not relevant or not important in a museum AD for blind users? This would actually improve anybody's experience. On the other hand, from a more holistic approach or perspective, museum AD may actually offer a valuable opportunity to promote a dialogue about the described objects among people with distinct abilities, who may be equally involved also in participatory interpretative practices. And this actually already exists, although this is probably one of the few exceptions. Here is one of them. This is a project developed by the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. You want to gain access to a painting without looking at it. Isn't that a bit of a paradox? Perhaps, but it is what blind people do when they take part in guided tours of the museum and listen to descriptions of paintings. What if these descriptions gave a real aesthetic experience to both blind and sighted people? And here, if you keep on reading this, basically it's a participatory approach where these recordings have been collaboratively created by sighted and non-sighted groups of people. And what does it mean? Why is it interesting? And this experience helps us, they say, to learn to see the essential, discover that low or no vision, gives you a different way of engaging with a painting, undergo a different kind of aesthetic immersion, imagine textures, imagine movements, and then feel the artist's gestures in your own body. So it's also an experience, it may be an enriching experience for anybody. And of course, these example was made by and for different groups of people, no matter their abilities. Here is an example of this project. So if you open this link, if you click on this link, you can listen to one of these recordings. Feel free to reach out if you're interested in these things. We don't have enough time now, probably, but if you want, you can listen to it later. And then another example I want to just mention quickly is Museum AD for All from the MAXI, the National Museum of 21st Century Arts in Rome. Unfortunately, the content is only available in Italian, but I'm working on the translation of these audio descriptions with the master students for a dissertation, so hopefully they will be available in English too. And here there are basically very famous Italian actors who have recorded their description of artworks or installations, and this is called collezione da ascoltare, so collection to be listened to, and it's again not only for non-sighted but for all. So the point I'm trying to make is that Museum AD could simply be made available to all, regardless of the user's profiles, by embracing a universal design approach, providing different optional customizable layers of interpretation and allowing people to choose, again, according to their preferences and needs. It's not a matter of thinking about an instrument for a specific audience. There are no special tools for special audiences, I think, but there are instruments that enrich everybody's experience by encouraging observation, curious observation, and improving visual literacy. So when we attach labels such as for the deaf or for the blind, this tends to reflect a limited perspective, assuming that other people who don't recognize necessarily themselves as part of those groups wouldn't actually find such resources equally useful. So of course, this raises questions about the value of different types of information for different audiences. And conceiving a museum ID as a social inclusive tool also enables museums to bring diversity issues to the fore in order to raise awareness about them, to talk about them, and encourages shared experiences between sighted and non-sighted visitors. Shared experiences doesn't necessarily mean the same experience, but equal opportunities for everybody. And finally, if we consider accessibility as a process rather than an end in itself, Museum ID may be developed to experiment with participatory interpretative practices involving sighted and non-sighted, as in the case of Musée du Quai Branly, and this may foster a dialogue and more participation and co-creation. It would probably contribute to reimagining communicative and interpretative practices and discourses around our own cultural heritage. And as Caitlin, I think, rightly said this morning, inclusion is co-creation. It's not about inviting people in, it's also about creating spaces for people to feel they belong there, no matter their background or abilities. But this seems like, yeah, a pun, but how can we broaden the horizons of Museum ID beyond the niche, beyond the realm of disability access? And how can we project it basically into the mainstream of sighted museum experience? And how can we also collect, let's say, gather up AD resources already made available by different cultural institutions? I think this may be also the power of Europeana. Why is this all is all this relevant to Europeana? As you know, Europeana addresses different creative ways of using cultural heritage, and in particular, it shares the belief that access to our culture, to cultural heritage, is transformational. It empowers people and benefits society as a whole. So not just a few, but everyone. And I think in 2020, the Europeana Foundation made a commitment to diversity and inclusion even clearer by saying that cultural heritage empowers us to embrace our diversity and flourish. And also Europeana is committed to making its platform itself and the content provided increasingly accessible. So perhaps it may also provide, I don't know, links to audio descriptions of cultural heritage materials as accessible and inclusive resources for all, or perhaps ADs might be offered as useful ready-made educational resources for learners and educators as well. So to conclude, here is a quote by Goodman. Here he was trying to make a point in favor of museums by remarking their purpose to prevent blindness. He said, work when by stimulating inquisitive looking, sharpening perceptions, raising visual intelligence, widening perspectives, bringing out new connections and contrasts, and marking off neglected significant kinds, they participate in the organization and reorganization of experience, in the making and remaking of our worlds. And I think some of us may not be blind, but may need support to appreciate cultural heritage. I'm speaking for myself, hopefully not just for me, but AD seems to be the perfect fit for museums to understand and actually undertake this mission. This requires, I think, a shift to an inclusion-oriented model in which access is not a minority issue, basically, but regards us all. So this was just a few take-home messages, or I have sought to, again, approach accessibility issues from a broader perspective and reflect on the inclusive power of an access modality such as museum-wanted description, and suggest perhaps innovative practices and discourses around heritage, also drawing on academic research from translation studies. So thank you very much. Hopefully it's not too late, but I'd be glad to hear your comments, questions, thoughts. Feel free to get in touch, and I'm happy to collaborate on new related projects too. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for this super inspirational presentation. You mentioned some really interesting things that I thought was fascinating about, like accessibility not being a separate thing. And also at Europeana, I think this is something that we've recently also merged accessibility with our diversity and inclusion team, but also the point you made about Europeana playing a really big role here as well for audio descriptions. And I think this is something that we had a conversation about ages ago, how we could provide audio descriptions to our digitized collections as well. But this is something that has so far not yet been taken up. But I think indeed, after also seeing your presentation and, you know, actually being quite inspired by it, I think this is something that we should, yeah. I can't find the words, but we should, you know, how do you say, bring it up again and we look at it, but also if we could reach out to you as well and get your support with this, that would be wonderful.
Well, of course, thank you so much for your comments, and I always hope to be as provocative as possible, or to provoke some kind of reactions at least. So I'm happy it was relevant or important to you. And of course, the funny thing about audio descriptions that this can be probably proved also by the first poll, although not statistically, is that we have all heard of it before, and it's not a new practice, but it's actually it's still an emerging practice, because apart from screen audio descriptions, so audio descriptions of films, I don't think it's very common still in museums in Europe in general, and in Italy in particular. But I think I don't know, I will ask Tina about their projects and other museums, of course, not just art museums, especially other types of museums. But I think, yeah, it would definitely be worth looking at it, especially for Europeana. So I will be happy to reach out and talk about it again.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the audience as well for joining in.